Well, hi everyone. Janet Macreery joins Inside Scoop Live today to talk about her latest novel, The Falls. It's a middle grade historical fiction about an 11-year-old girl named Monty who finds herself in the Alaskan wilderness when her widowed father takes a job in the area. Monty navigates the rugged terrain, forms unlikely friendships, and learns important life lessons about danger, beauty, and resilience beyond the falls. Before we get started, here's the inside scoop on the author. Janet R. Macreery is the author of the multi-award-winning historical fiction adventures A Little Wicked and A Little Noble, as well as her new release, The Falls. She explores the United States and Europe for inspiration and research, as well as her quest to find the ultimate hot chocolate. You can learn more about Janet and her work at janetmacreery.wordpress.com. Well, hi, Janet. Welcome to Inside Scoop Live.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's start with a little background information. Why don't you tell us what your book, The Falls, is about, and then maybe a little bit about the inspiration behind the story.
Well, I was lucky enough to spend a week where the story is set in a place called Brooks Camp at Katmai National Park and Preserve in Alaska a couple years ago. And I didn't go there intending to write a book, but being there was such a fascinating experience, I could not stop thinking about it when I got home. And I started to do a little research and put some things together and figured out that the time that the camp was created in the 1950s would have been around the time my mom was a middle grader and I write middle grade fiction. And so it just kind of stuck with me that I had to write this book. And I had a character that I named after the friend who made it possible for us to go to Brooks Camp. So The Falls is a middle grade historical fiction adventure that takes place at Brooks Camp in Alaska in 1953. 11-year-old Monty must accompany her father to a fishing camp in the wilds of Alaska for his summer job.
Okay. So The Falls is not the actual name of the setting. What does the falls symbolize in your story?
The title, The Falls, it depends on the reader as to what resonates with them. It could mean the physical waterfalls. It could mean sort of the missteps or mistakes that happen with the characters, or even the physical tumbles that they might take. But Brooks Falls, to me, is a symbol for life's contradictions. So all the animals that live at Brooks Falls need water, as all animals do. But they also have to fight against the water in order to survive. So the fish, the salmon, have to swim against the current of the water and then jump the falls to fulfill their genetic destiny by laying their eggs. And the bears have to fight against the rush of the water of the falls in order to stay in place to catch the fish as they try to make the jump, because they need to eat the fish in order to survive their hibernation.
Yeah, circle of life, yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you mentioned this is a middle grade novel, and I know you've written a couple of other middle grade novels. What is it that draws you to this age group?
I think middle graders are really great people who often get overlooked in literature. I think they are way too old to be taught lessons, and they're way too young to have truly horrific things in their stories to be the only part of the story. You have to go straight at a middle grader. You have to tell them the way that it is, exactly the way that it is. And then they will trust you to go along for the rest of the story. If there's something tragic that happens, you give it to them straight and they can take it, and then they'll trust you. And I love that about middle graders.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's kind of at the age where they take everything at face value. So tell us about Monty. She's 11. She's your protagonist. What's she like? Kind of what motivates her? And I guess what was your approach to developing her character arc?
So yeah, Monty is a girl in the 1950s where children were not encouraged to express themselves quite the way they are today, and sort of a seen but not heard era. And she was a little girl at a men's fishing camp. So there were a lot of issues when she first arrives. But the longer she stays there, the higher the stakes get to stay. And she has to learn to make these tough decisions and not react emotionally if it's going to hurt the best interest of her most important relationship, which is the one with her father. She needs to be able to put up with bullies and adhere to certain pretty strict rules as far as where she can go and when she can go there and who she can go there with. She has to make tough decisions in order to protect the best interests of her father's job and her relationship with her father.
Okay. So you talked about the fact that, she's the only girl in a men's fishing camp, and then you touched on some bullying that she had to deal with. Where did that bullying come from? Were there other children in the camp?
This is a remote fishing camp where she's the only child.
Oh.
So the bully is an adult.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which I felt it was really important to explore the topic of bullies are not always in your peer group.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's different too. How did you come up with that idea?
Well, being in Brooks Camp in and of itself, because of all the potential natural dangers that she faces on a daily basis, had a lot of tension points for Monty from the beginning. But to have an adult bully trying to show everyone there that you don't belong there was a different kind of personal conflict that Monty had to face on absolutely a daily basis. And I just thought it was an interesting take on what bullying means and what it means to be bullied.
Yeah. I mean, I know it happens, but, I don't think I've ever read a story about that dynamic before. So you mentioned Monty's relationship with her father as her most important relationship, of course. To what extent did real life relationships influence that father-daughter dynamic in your story?
So the most real-to-life relationship in the story is Monty's Aunt Betty. So in the story, Monty's mother has passed away when she was 4, and Aunt Betty has been helping her father raise Monty and while living her own life. I had an Aunt Betty. She's my great Aunt Betty. She was my mom's Aunt Betty. And like Monty's aunt, she was a teacher and a bit of a worrier. And my mom also lived close to her Aunt Betty, so she did have a bit of a help in raising my mom, not as much as Monty's Aunt Betty did, but so that is a real life connection. Whenever I wrote about Aunt Betty in the book, I thought about my Aunt Betty.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, I love that. It just makes everything more authentic.
Yes.
You actually are writing what you know. I know you hear that all the time, write what you know, but when you're bringing that into the story, it really does make it more authentic, and readers can sense that. So tell us about the roles of Mrs. Devon and Mr. Charles. How do they contribute to Monty's journey?
So Mrs. Devon and Mr. Charles are Monty's mentors in the story. So Mrs. Devon is the only other female at camp. She works in the lodge where they serve the meals, and she is a strong model for what behaviors Monty can use to do well in a man-dominated environment. Mm-hmm. She also teaches Monty about all of the plants in camp. Mr. Charles is the opposite energy to what we currently call toxic masculinity. Mm-hmm. He has all the positive parts of men's behavior in the 1950s and also teaches Monty a lot about the animals who live at Brooks Camp. Okay. They both spend a lot of time with her outside of being with her father. So they spend alone time with her. All of them are friends, and as all friends do, they learn a lot from each other.
Yeah. So Mrs. Devon and Aunt Betty, those are really Monty's only female influences in the story. So,
yes.
Okay, so they each play very important roles in Monty's life. Tell us a little bit about the research process. You mentioned you had an opportunity to go to Alaska, and I am jealous. I hear it's absolutely beautiful. So tell us about your research process for capturing the Alaskan wilderness, especially in the Brooks River area.
Well, I think Alaska is on a lot of people's sort of dream vacation list. And it's only because a friend of ours was up there at the time that we were able to go. That we actually made the commitment that, okay, this is the time. This is our only chance that we would actually do this, to go visit our friends. So that's what we did. And again, I didn't go there intending to write a book. But when I do write a historical fiction book and I'm going in there thinking about it, I think it's so important to have boots on the ground It's so important to have been there and experienced some of these things. Yes, when I got home, I read extensively in books and journals and online articles and interviews. I studied photographs. I have pamphlets on Alaskan plant life. I have all kinds of research, and all that's important.
Hmm.
But there's a sense in a place that you can only get in that place. It can't really be relayed through anything else. And people often take great pride in where they live, and they have stories that might not be written down. And all of that folds into the story, the plot lines, and the characters in one way or another.
Yeah, that makes sense, though. It's kind of like, again, writing what you know, what you've experienced, and it just brings a different element to the story for sure.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, yeah. And, even if you didn't get to meet any of the locals, or maybe you did, but you were there, you observed, you probably sensed some of that hometown pride that you were talking about, and you were able to relay some of that into your story. And that goes back to, what we talked about earlier, that authenticity. Did you go back at all to research once you decided to write a book, or was it pretty fresh in your mind still?
I really wanted to write it while it was fresh in my mind because I didn't think I would ever go back.
Yeah.
It really is a trek to get there. It is a commitment. Um, and our friend has moved on, so she's not there anymore.
Oh, okay.
But once I figured out that I had a story and I wanted to write it, I needed to write it immediately so I didn't miss those details.
Yeah, yeah. The Falls deals with some challenging themes as well, like loss. You talked about the loss of Monty's mother and the realities of the world. How did you approach writing about these difficult topics for the younger audience?
Again, I think that middle graders are capable of understanding complex emotions and difficult situations because they experience them in their own lives. It seems younger and younger all the time.
Hmm.
But they really can't handle it if you just tell them the truth. You go straight at the story, and they'll be able to tell if you're embellishing, and they'll be able to tell if you're trying to spare their feelings. So if you go straight at the issue and tell them like it is, they're going to trust that. They're going to appreciate that, and they're going to go on for the rest of the story with you.
Okay. They're more likely to call you out if something doesn't feel right. We don't give them enough credit. And I think even for a younger age group, we don't give them enough credit for what they're able to understand, absorb, deal with. We don't want them to deal with some of these things, but they are capable.
They are paying attention and they are absorbing everything.
Yeah, sponges.
Yep.
So what kind of strategies did you employ to balance the wilderness dangers as an engaging adventure for the younger readers?
Life at the camp at Brooks River is absolutely dangerous all the time. So there was no trouble in finding adventures. Every time Monty went anywhere, there was a potential for danger. The balancing act was presenting those dangers in a realistic way without making it seem impossible for Monty to be there at all.
Mm.
So there are, for example, one of her first mornings there, she sees a bear paw print outside her tent in the mud.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, I mean, that's how close she was to a bear and didn't know it. So leaving sort of clues like that and then ramping up the how much she actually interacts with the dangers as the story goes on. But you have to kind of plant the seed first that, okay, we really are in a dangerous place. Okay, yes, anything could happen. But also be like, well, then why did they bring this child here? It has to make sense.
Right, right.
That was the true balancing act. And her mentors really are what helped with that because she had Mrs. Devon or Mr. Charles at different times in order to not be alone in this place while her father was working.
Right, right. What kind of participant was she in nature and wildlife? Was she eager to learn? Was she a little, not scared, but, hesitant?
She comes from a suburb of Chicago. And so as her father puts it, she's here to experience something besides asphalt and concrete. So she's not well versed in nature, but she's curious. As many children are, she was curious about things. And once Mr. Charles and Mrs. Devon are able to engage her and say why she should need to know these things or how it's important to her father's job that she know these things or just simply spark her curiosity a little bit more and a little bit more, she becomes very interested in learning and being able to participate in the camp as opposed to just being there.
And that's another example of just, telling them like it is and explaining the situation and letting her learn and grow from there. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Were there specific lessons that you wanted to convey? I know your targeted audience is kind of above being preached to, but were there ways that you integrated kind of lessons in your story?
Yeah, well, like you said, they're gonna smell a lesson a mile away. So it's not something that I go in thinking about. I don't think about life lessons. I think about the story. But I do think there are two important things that can be learned from Monty. The first is the importance of observing and processing what you've observed, like we talked about middle graders and how they're sponges. They soak up everything. So it becomes very important in Monty's story that she be observing and processing what she observes. And the second is to lead with kindness. So Monty is confronted with some very unkind things, and she has to make the choice to lead with kindness in order to preserve her own sense of being as well as her relationship with her father. And I think that is something that we can all do more.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm.
So tell us a little bit about the themes of risk taking and personal growth and how they connect with your target audience.
So I always say that the middle grade years are about figuring out how the world works, right? And the way you do that is by taking risks, by pushing your boundaries and learning what those consequences are if you've pushed too far. And then once you've pushed too far and learned those consequences, you know where the actual boundaries are and you sort of map those out. And then you can search for more boundaries and find out where sort of you feel the boundaries are. And that is personal growth, to actually observe, learn, and then adhere to what you've learned is personal growth after the risk taking. So you take the risk of pushing the boundary in order to learn what happens when you do.
Okay, okay. So related to that, I'm assuming there might have been some risk taking and personal growth around her relationship with Doyle. Is there anything you can tell us about that without giving too much away? Do you know what I'm
Yes,
asking?
I do. And I can't give too much away, but yes, Monty's relationship with Doyle starts off with a lot of confrontation. It evolves over time, and she needs to learn that Doyle is not going to change. There's nothing she can do or say to change Doyle. So she needs to change her behavior around Doyle.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, 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 without giving anything away, yes. It's hard to, that's hard to do, especially in someone 11 years old. I don't, that's hard for me as an adult to do. So, but some people just are not capable of change. So nice. Okay.
Yeah, it takes a long time to learn that. So
Yeah, yeah. Were there any kind of techniques you used to balance kind of the action-packed moments with the quieter character building type scenes?
right. So my first draft is fairly unbalanced. I just write to get the story out, sort of. And then I go back and I make an actual chart and I chart out sort of where the action is and where the character-driven scenes are. And I think, gee, the characters have been talking a lot. Maybe I should insert some action in there. Or, it's been a lot of pages since we took a break. I probably need to have a conversation somewhere. And sometimes it's just a matter of like inverting two scenes to make that flow. Sometimes it requires writing a whole new scene. And sometimes, sadly, it means you have to delete a scene, which is super sad and so hard to do, but sometimes necessary.
Yeah, yeah. That's where your strength comes as a writer because you've got to be, I don't know, that would be hard for me to do. You're talking about your baby in a sense, and what do they say? Kill your darlings. And
Yeah, kill your darlings. And I don't kill them. I keep them in a file. I know a lot of writers do this. You keep a deleted scenes file because you might use it someplace else someday.
Oh, yeah, great. Okay. Now, our reviewer kind of mentioned she is a mature adult reader, and she loved the appeal of your story for all ages. And I know a lot of adults do enjoy that reading age range. Was it your intention to appeal to adult readers, or is it just happening naturally through your story?
After my first book, I was really surprised by the feedback I was getting from particularly women, but adults, particularly in like the 60s, 70s, and 80s age range. And the feedback they were giving me was that they enjoyed the authenticity of the story. They loved the details of the history or the location, depending on the book, and both most of the time. And that action stories with female leads were not prevalent when they were middle graders. And so it was something that kind of felt they'd been sort of missing and craving, and to be able to read them now was a treat for them. That was the feedback I was getting.
Oh, that's wonderful feedback. Yeah. Wow. I love that. That kind of keeps you going, doesn't it?
It really does. It really does.
Wow. So is there anything about your visit or an interesting fact you learned about the Alaskan wilderness from your research that didn't make it into the book?
I love this question because you do so much research to write a book. And I managed to fit a lot into this one, but there's always something that doesn't make it in. So it's something that doesn't make it. So I love this question. In the early spring, and it didn't make the book because Monty was not there in the early spring, but in the early spring, there are these little tiny fish who migrate out of Bristol Bay into Naknek River, which is where Monty begins her journey into Brooks Campus, the Naknek River, and the beluga whales migrate with them.
Oh, wow.
There's this river near a town where there's just whales swimming by.
That I've never heard of that before. I didn't know whales hang out in rivers.
Yeah, it's like, wow.
That's crazy. Wow. I bet you had a lot of things that didn't make it into the book that were just, I mean, you said you crammed a lot in, but it is, I'm sure it's just impossible to cram everything in that you want to share with readers. Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's so much. I mean, it's such an amazing place.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think our reviewer also said she dares you to read this book and not want to go to Alaska after reading it. So I love that.
I love that too. That's what a compliment.
Yeah, yeah. So I know The Falls just came out. What's next for you?
Well, the first two books are A Little Wicked and A Little Noble. They're also middle grade historical fiction adventures, but they're set in Scotland and Salem, and also the second one's in Scotland in the 1690s. And I was writing the third one when we got this opportunity to go to Alaska. And like I said, when I got home and I figured out I had a book, I wanted to write it down before I forgot all the details. So The Falls sort of jumped the queue, and I wrote that one first. So I have a broad outline of the third book of what will be a trilogy with A Little Wicked and A Little Noble. And so I have to get back to writing that.
Oh, okay. Do you have a working title for this one?
A Little Grace.
Oh, okay. I love it. What stage are you at with this project?
Well, I need to make a trip.
Okay. Where are you going?
This story is going to start in Scotland, but it's going to end in Virginia in a small area called Pungo, which is part of the Virginia Beach area.
Oh, okay.
And that's where the majority of the story will take place, and I've never been there.
Oh, that'll be fun. Yeah. And you don't have to go all the way to Scotland. You've been there before, though, I'm assuming, right?
Yes, we've been to Scotland a few times, and so, but I mean, I'll take any excuse to go back. Thank you very much. But for this particular story, it won't be necessary.
Okay, okay. Well, Janet, is there anything else you'd like to add today?
Just thank you for having me. I really enjoyed my time, and I really hope that people can get a sense of what Brooks Camp is like and enjoy it through the book or go there themselves.
Okay. Where can listeners find out more information about your book?
So my website is janetmacreery.wordpress. So that's JANETMACRERY.WORDPRESS.com. I'm also on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, LinkedIn, and it's at Janet Macreery.
Okay, great. So you're everywhere. Easy access readers. Yes. Okay. Well, Janet, thank you so much for coming on the show today and talking with me about your book, The Falls. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me today for my interview with Janet Macreery, author of The Falls. You can learn more about Janet and her work at janetmacreery.wordpress.com. And be sure to check out our other interviews at InsideScoopLive.com.